Thank you. Thank you for your kind words, and thank you for inviting me. You're giving me a chance to narrate back to you what I've been researching during the last year on the history of Ahmadiyya mission in Europe. The plan is to cover the whole of 100 years of history. Research has been rewarded by the Council of Pure Science in Germany, which is a big step. I'll be with you the coming 3 years. Now, Mr. Nasser Ahmad asked me to do a lecture on the history and impact of the mission on the spread of Islam in the West. For listening to you yesterday, I understood that both subjects, history and impact, are large on your mind. I took the liberty to narrow down the subject a bit to continental Europe. I start with history, and the history is too large. I do not know everything, and I took the liberty to tell you 4 small stories, which I think are seminal to where you are today. And after that, I'll attack, counter, encounter, address the impact. Now, my first story. All my stories start from this building, which is the mosque and mission house in Berlin. It's where I'm situated, it's where I see this history unrolling. In 1923, 10 years after Kamaluddin rediscovered and opened this here mosque, his right hand, Sadruddin, was sent to Berlin. He came with a plan. It was premeditated. And immediately when entering the city, he started to set the switches to turn his plan into reality. Now, let me first relate to you the switches and then say what the plan was. We see Sadruddin, the photograph is a bit later, and a photograph that appeared in 1925 in the paper, in the Berlin paper, saying very enthusiastically, "Here's our mosque, you already see the dome appearing." Now, what did he do? Coming in on 1923, he bought a plot in a new part of town. He supervised the building of the mission house where future missionaries were going to live and the mosque. He organized this infrastructure to edit, publish a mission paper, the Moslemische Revue, supervised the first issues in 1924, and he attracted and appointed a Jewish philosopher, Hugo Marcus, to be the manager of the mosque. The man was given a lifelong job. Marcus was then in his 40s, and he was very well known and established as a publisher and critic in German papers. 4 important steps to set his plan into action. Now, what was the plan? I say it to you in my own words because I cannot repeat that flowery language the first missionaries used. It's not our language anymore. But what Kamaluddin and Sadruddin and also Muhammad Ali, the president of the then Anjuman, wrote in those years and what they wanted to set into movement in Berlin, of all cities of Europe, was very daring. They wanted to reform Islam through starting a conversation with Europeans. Now, this was a knife that cut both edges. They wanted to reform the old ways, and they wanted to take in new thought, novel thought from European intellectuals. The topic they talked about was then called modernity. They wanted to speak about modernity and especially how to modernize one's religious tradition. And the outcome had to be something that would change both sides. Not only change Islam, but also change European civilization. This was 1923, remember? There had been this vicious world war. Berlin was at the brink of a civil war. It was a dangerous situation. Lots of people were exasperated. And here came a man from India, widely unknown to Germans, and made this suggestion. I'll come back to the plan. Now, there were several reasons why he was successful. He had help. The first one was that he built this mosque in a totally new borough of Berlin, Wilmersdorf. Here's a famous painting, an expressionist painting of 10 years before, Meitner. This is Wilmersdorf seen from the newly built U-Bahn. Now, what you see is sand. This was an empty spot. And in 10 years' time, a big city was built with big houses, big streets, big squares. You needed money to get in. And who moved in this new place without any tradition? German intellectuals and artists, especially Jewish intellectuals and artists, and Muslims, who came in droves to Berlin to study there and to do business. So what we had, here's a map of 1925. Where's this little pointer? What I just showed you was here. The new U-Bahn looking at Kurfürstendamm, Gedächtniskirche, Bahnhof Zoo, for you who know Berlin. This was the fashionable part of town. And here was a new borough. And what came up in this new borough was a new religious infrastructure. Those round dots are the mosques. The below one is the one I'm talking about. The upper one was of the brother organization Ahmadiyya Qadiani. They built as well and had to tear down the mosque because they lost the money in the crash. And all those halves, I put in 10, are new synagogues that were just being built at the same time. So here was a new religious infrastructure. I did not put in all the social and political tiny organizations, hundreds of Jewish ones, and I counted 42 Muslim ones. Sadruddin, you see, was not alone. There were 20,000 Muslims in that time in Berlin, and 42 organizations. He also had competitors. And his most important competitor is the man on the left with the turban, Jabbar Kheri. It's not very straight on the screen, but you can see it. Jabbar Kheri, a very wild man who promoted world revolution as a solution to the world's problems. He traveled to Moscow especially for this and offered Muslim world revolution to join the Russian, who was turned down. He set up the first Muslim organization in Berlin. The one on the right with the white is Nafi Chelebi from Syria, He was more cautious and promoted the nationalist cause. He was premeditating new Muslim states and was preparing for it. Now, both these men attracted converts, but they were not able to build a mosque. Their structures were shortly lived. You see Jabahiri in the makeshift mosque down there, was one of the POW camps outside of Berlin, where 15 and the other one 10,000 Muslim combatants were gathered. That mosque was later torn down. It was for a long time the place where Muslims went, until Sadr ad-Din built his mosque. Here's my second story. I make a jump. When Sadr ad-Din left, he was replaced by this man, Dr. Sheikh Mohammed Abdullah. For Berlin, a very important figure. He was in Berlin from 1928 to 1939, and I want to appreciate that the longest time he was in Berlin, he had to navigate through Nazi terror. And that influenced what he did. Now, I found a small self-description of Abdullah in the mosque archive. It's very modest. It says, I'm an Indian, I'm 34 years old. From to I was professor at Punjab University. I came to Germany to do duty as imam of the mosque. I published the quarterly, and I'm secretary general of the Deutsch Muslimische Gesellschaft. That's very short and very modest. And when you look around in that mosque, you find proof of everything he says. There's this photograph still hanging in the office where you see Abdullah in the middle of his rugby team back in India. He was a very sporty type. He must have been very proud of this photograph that is still hanging there. You see him in his parish. Here's the 8th, 1930. It was a very flowering parish. Yes, I'll come back to it later. He was a real good imam. He published the quarterly. I found a copy in the mosque. It says on the back down there, Dr. Abdullah. He was very proud of it. And he was Secretary General of the Deutsch Muslimische Gesellschaft. And here are the presidents. I just want to introduce them to you. The first one, the thinker, well, that is Hugo Marcus, who started as a Jewish manager and in the course of 6 years converted to Islam. Because of trouble, because of pressure by the Nazi regime and visits by the Gestapo, he retired 1935. He stayed in the mosque. He worked on, but he wasn't president anymore. And Bosveld, the one back down there, Mr. Zeiler, they followed him up. And those two couples, they married in the mosque, Bayer and Schubert, and they were always in the board. Well-known names. But he did more than that. Abdullah, then. I found this announcement of a lecture in the Jewish Reform community. And I found many more such announcements. He was a well-versed speaker in different religious backgrounds. Interfaith, we would say today, with Buddhists, with Theosophists, in the Jewish Reform community, never with the classical Christian churches. He wasn't interested in that. What they were looking for was other people, other religious communities who were rethinking their religious community, the religious tradition. Baha'i, they were interested in that. What else did he do? He participated in the many peace conferences that took place in that time. He drew up questionnaires for peace potentials of religions. Uppsala, London, Zurich, he was there. Then, maybe the most important, he made a network across Europe, Middle Europe, Central Europe, and Eastern Europe, the indigenous Muslim communities who were reorganizing themselves after 1918 and had reformers, Muslim reformers rethinking their communities, he organized a network. Their texts appeared in the Moslemische Revue. The texts in the Moslemische Revue were translated in many languages and appeared in Belgrade and in Tirana. There were visits. He went on a mission visit. They supported communities materially if they could. This was a promising network. And he did a mosque library. Let me see. Now, everything I told you, you find in the mosque library. I did a reconstruction. There must have been some 1,000 books. And the most important, the half of it, was on Muslim modernization and on modern trends in religion. That's really interesting. I'm going to write about this. It's unique. There's no mosque library I know of today that made such a broad scope. So that is Abdullah. Now here comes the community. This is 1936. And you might think, well, there's the community, everything must be well. Here they were sitting during the festival on chairs in the mosque, and men and women together, and they do not cover their heads. And if you look very carefully, you see 2 Arab men sitting on the floor. Everybody did what they wanted themselves as they thought they could celebrate. They look Lutheran, they are Muslim. And this was the idea, they could stay themselves. Now, this community was under heavy, by 1936, under heavy pressure. First, from the Muslim community in Berlin. Abdullah, but also the community, was defamated many, many times. Letters were written by the Berlin community to journals across the Arab world and in India. This was the most vicious attack. Photograph of Abdullah, you hardly can see anything, but the text below says, I cannot read it, but I read a translation. He's illicitly touching a European woman. Now, that was bad. He was also accused of playing tennis with his wife and of eating pork and of seeing films, of whatever you name it. Now, maybe some of you think, well, that is because they were Ahmadiyya. No, it hardly played a role. The accusations always said, because this community and this man is dealing with Jews and communists. Now, the enemy, because it was the enemy then, they wanted to have the mosque. That was very clear. They want to be the partner of the Nazi regime. And they wanted his own Ahmadiyya. The community kept together. This is how Abdullah hit back. He wrote to the Foreign Office saying, our president, Mr. Boesveld, is member of the Opferkreis. NSDAP is the main Nazi party. Our second secretary, Klop von Hoof, is member of NSDAP and SS, which is very dangerous. The treasurer, Mr. Schubert, is member of the Arbeitsfront. And the first assessor, Mr. Bayer, is member of the NSDAP. Now, this reads like a directory of the main Nazi organizations. And it's not a screen. It's not that they just went into these parties to rescue their Muslim community. Those people were Nazis. Now, and here's a secret, a riddle. They kept together because Nazis were also interested in becoming a Muslim and thinking the world anew. So they were sitting together. Marcus was there. They were sitting together. They were Jews and they were Nazis. They were sitting together and still discussing how to stitch the best of European thought with the best of Muslim thought. 2 years later, Marcus is thrown into a concentration camp. After the synagogues burned, 20,000 Jews, male Jews, were taken from their beds and put into the camp with the pressure them into migrating. And this community made a rescue committee. This is what Marcus later wrote. On November 9, I was imprisoned in the concentration camp of Oranienburg, Sachsenhausen, that's near Berlin, thanks to the united efforts of Superintendent Ungnad, a Protestant, Prince George von Sachsen, a Catholic. Both gentlemen regularly took part in our Islam evenings, and our Imam, Dr. Abdullah. I was set free within a month. They were successful. They both left the year after, when the war broke out. Abdullah went back to Lahore. Marcus fled to Switzerland. But business went on as usual. I found 30 letters in Zurich in his private archive, from which I learned that the missionaries in Lahore wrote to him, and he wrote to the mosque in Berlin. Communication was friendly. This was about Quran editions, new printings, a foreword. It was business. 3 years they kept it up still. And then it was finished. It came to an end, and this is my last story. The mosque in the war and post-war, those 3 years that followed, I haven't found a shred. Somebody must have cleaned up that mosque after the war. There are too many people with an invested interest that we do not know what happened, but I know it became a state mosque of the regime. Well, they had almost 1 million Muslim combatants in their armies, so there were official receptions in that mosque. And when the war was over 3 years later, I might just make this jump because for me this is still a blank. Many of the members were dead, and those who returned had deeply been involved in Nazi dealings. They were contaminated. So they had an invested interest to close up history. It's one of the reasons why we know so little about what happened before. Now, immediately after, and this is another devastating blow for the community, the Cold War started. There was this so-called Iron Curtain. It cut off the Berlin community from its network. And there was deglobalization setting in on the European continent. People did not want to think about global matters, about how to rethink their tradition, how to connect to a different tradition. They did not want to know. And the third blow was that from the 60s on in Germany, there was this influx of workers from Turkey and North Africa who were, most of them, illiterate, and they could not start to think what these people wanted, an intellectual exchange, a think tank. This is what they had, a think tank. Now, they had the wrong public from the 60s on. Which brings me to the impact. I heard you say yesterday, where has it all been gone? What has been left of that? Now, let me enumerate what I found. There was first the impact in the interwar. You shouldn't forget that. I found these 2 little texts of Abdullah. In the one it says, there are more than 100 converts, and the other said, we have a meeting of 400 Muslims and friends of Islam. See, it was not important for them whether people converted to Islam. They were welcome, of course, but it was much more important to have friends sit together and think how to do it. A think tank of 400 people, ladies and gentlemen, is enormous. If you think of European research groups, I'm familiar with those that get their money from EU. Now, 25, 30, 40 at the most is already a big group. Lots of work can be done. So this is what they achieved, a think tank of 400 people. Now, there was an impact in the Arab world. And where I have these texts, they're translated from the Arabic, there's more. Sheikh Arslan, the writer, was a famous Arabic reformer, and he often visited the mosque, and he admired what these people did. So he is explaining on the one hand, who are the Ahmadiyya? He says it's the only Muslim group who cares about the issue of Islamic missionary work and defends the Islamic doctrine, and he takes care to make a difference between the Lahore and the Qadiani group. And he also said Ahmadiyya ought to be considered an example to follow. This is the wrong map, but it doesn't matter. I wanted to say Arslan organized a meeting to start an organization for European Islam. And Abdullah brought in the Eastern communities. What is missing here are the dots indicating London, Den Haag, Paris, Madrid, who also sent their delegates. This was a very promising beginning. And then, looking at your organization, there's the impact of durability. You still exist, after all what happened. And I think that's amazing. It's a global organization. You're not dependent on local politics. You're organized in ways that enable to overcome severe ruptures. And against all odds, you have maintained that Berlin mission post. So, and here's my last, I think the most important impact for you today is the heritage. Now, if you do not ask, where has it all gone? But instead say, what did those missionaries say? What did they do that made communication possible? So, what lessons can be learned from the past? And maybe also, what language do we need to translate that into today? Well, then we are there, now let me, I noted down his name, sorry. Yes, Mr. Ray Morgan, is he still there? He gave then the word to me, what he called a renaissance of Islam. That's where you're entering upon when you do that. Okay? So, thank you, and